After the S&P Plus rankings release, why is ESPN now saying bye on Ole Miss football?
You are Locked On Ole Miss, your daily podcast on the Ole Miss Rebels. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
The Locked On Ole Miss podcast is the most watched Ole Miss podcast out there. I'm your host, Steven Willis, a 10-year veteran member of the national media with Yahoo Sports and a former Ole Miss staff member. On today's show, we dive into the Ole Miss Rebels breaking into the top 10 of the 2025 S&P Plus rankings on ESPN. While some in the national media might not be on board, the message is clear. Now is the time to buy stock in the Rebels before the season takes off. We'll also take a look at some so-called trendy programs that the experts say you should sell stock in. Plus, we break down what could be the biggest basketball game of the Chris Beard era as Ole Miss takes on Oklahoma tomorrow. We tell you why this game is a game changer in Ole Miss's season. We're free and available on all the podcast apps and on YouTube. Thank you for making Locked On Ole Miss your first listen every day, and a special hello to the insiders and everydayers who make this show what it is. And don't forget to find a second listen on the network. Chris Gordy at Locked On SEC or Corey Burton at Locked On Vandy offer great perspectives on college football, the SEC, and yes, even Ole Miss. So check it out. So this week's been an interesting content week, if you want to look at it, because of rankings and the typical February type stuff that goes around the national media. And ESPN spent this week releasing their S&P Plus. They did earlier in the week the returning players and the returning productions going to each team, which was kind of interesting to me because the favorites in the conference have the lowest returning production almost across the board. The teams that are kind of mid to bad have the most returning production. I don't know if that is something saying about the transfer portal and not having good enough players to leave or not bringing in enough good players. I don't know exactly what it's saying, but it is saying something. Well, the S&P Plus actually released its total rankings, and I was kind of curious, after Ole Miss was 16th in the SEC in returning production, where would Bill Connolly put the Ole Miss Rebels? And the answer turned out to be a little bit simple. Ole Miss is predicted to be 9th in the S&P Plus rankings right now. I think that's 5th in the SEC, right behind Tennessee and Texas, and behind Georgia. They do not play Alabama. If you want to look at the schedule, we will in the next segment. Ole Miss plays one team that is ranked higher than them in this college football season, and the teams that are closest to Ole Miss gets them at home. That's the reason I'm so high on this schedule that Ole Miss has. If you just look at the ballpark around Ole Miss, Texas, Tennessee, Ole Miss, LSU, Clemson, Texas A&M. First of all, 5 SEC teams out of those 6 teams, Clemson in at number 11. Ole Miss is in a really good spot. You know, everybody that has been humans doing the rankings, going in the way too early rankings, has Ole Miss somewhere in the neighborhood of 20 to 25 if they're ranked at all. And this poll and this ranking system famously kind of is juxtaposing itself against Mark Schlabach, talking about what he thinks is going to happen. So it's kind of like metrics versus just human element. That is what's going on. And because of that, ESPN has developed a little bit of a system of who they can sell, who can buy, the teams that could be threats, the teams that are definitely going to take a step back. It's not a guarantee that you're going to do these results because last year Florida State was a buy. So remember that. But it's better to be there than not. And generally their sales all come through. For instance, if you just want to look at these sales on this team, talking about it says, as a general rule, the S&P Plus tends to do a better job finding teams that are overrated than those underrated. Last February, I listed 5 teams in the sell section. They went from a combined 43 and 22 in 2023 to 24 and 37 in 2024. Who from Schlabach's list does S&P Plus not seem to trust? It does not trust the Big 12 schools, Arizona State, Iowa State, and Texas Tech, close game winners, as they called them. Does not trust them as all. The Big 10 upstarts from a year ago, Illinois and Indiana, they do not like them as well. The whole state of South Carolina, apparently, they're not very high on South Carolina and Clemson, and they're also not very high on Texas at the moment. And if you look at the productivity that Texas actually lost, them being a trendy top pick in the country is simply because of the Manning name is on the quarterback. So that is what's going on with the sales. Now, if you want to look at the buys right now, kind of interesting stuff. Last year's fallen royalty, it says, Alabama and Michigan. They like both of them. Alabama and Michigan needs to find a quarterback. Pretty much everybody needs to find a quarterback this year. The SEC's upper middle class, Missouri, Oklahoma, Ole Miss, Tennessee, and also Texas A&M's on the list. I just didn't have a way to highlight them on this line as well. But those 5 teams, Iowa's on the list, and Miami with a question mark is on the list. He likes the Hurricanes. So in these rankings of what's happening, they like the fact that the SEC is going to take a step. And if you want to look at the top 20 rankings, Alabama's number 2, Georgia's number 4, Texas 7, Tennessee 8, Ole Miss 9, LSU 10, Texas A&M 12, Missouri 15, South Carolina 16, Florida 17, and Oklahoma 20. The SEC is dominating this list to the tune of, I think, 11 out of the 20 teams are Southeastern Conference teams. And you know what? They belong to be there. They should be there. So these rankings are interesting for the height that leads to Ole Miss going into this season. Everybody wants to tell the story of what's going about who is going to be good. Everybody is rating DJ Lagway and the Florida Gators, even though that schedule is absolutely terrible. Everybody's rating South Carolina, even though Lenore Sellers, when you take away the ability for him to run the football, he's just really not the same quarterback. Everybody is overrating Texas because they have a Manning at quarterback. Nobody's really talking about Alabama. Nobody's talking about Georgia, even though Georgia needs to find a quarterback, but there's always going to be talent with the Georgia Bulldogs. Everybody's talking about LSU and what could happen in Garrett Nussmeier. Nobody's talking about Ole Miss. Nobody's talking about Texas A&M. Nobody's talking about Missouri. Nobody's talking about Oklahoma. If you want to look at teams in the top 20 that have the ability to overperform, it's likely those teams. And if Texas A&M can figure out how to play zone coverage, they have a chance to be really good as well. These S&P Plus rankings are so interesting to me because they provide an analytical look, a metric-based look at the actual returning teams. And you still have to go out and win games. Nothing's going to be easy. But if Ole Miss goes chalk, they're going to be higher rated than 11 out of the 12 teams they are scheduled to face. And we'll talk about that in just a second. This Ole Miss football team has a chance, the way everything lines up, to have one of those T. Martin type seasons to where they just go. They turn out to be a really good team. They have weapons all over the field. If they can figure out the secondary, that's going to be the question mark just because we don't know. It's not that they don't have anybody to go back there. It's just nobody knows that they do. But they have running back. They have quarterback. They have wide receiver, tight end, offensive line. They seemingly have addressed their needs there. This team has a chance to be really good. And when you look at what's going on, Ole Miss was 19th in the country in offense. They're rated 19th. They're like 9th in defense and 7th in special teams. These are very, very high-level football parts of the game that Lane Kiffin has put together. And that's interesting to me as well. This Ole Miss team is getting at least the computer respect when everybody else is trying to disrespect and kind of wish-casting Ole Miss to just kind of go away. But bad news for them. They're likely not going anywhere. Ole Miss is a firm buy for 2025. We talked about that, but what did the rankings really say about the schedule? Who is teams that Ole Miss might have a better chance against than they're getting a little bit of credit for? So we'll talk about all that. Stay tuned for all the insights. Life moves fast, especially when you have a family. One day you're watching your kids take their first step, and before you know it, they're off to college. That is why securing their future is so important. Fabric by Gerber Life makes it simple to get term life insurance that fits your family's needs. With Fabric, you can apply for term life insurance online right from your couch. You could be covered in under 10 minutes, and in many cases without a health exam. You can get millions of dollars in coverage for less than $1 a day. That's a pretty good deal. So protecting your loved ones doesn't have to break the bank. Fabric also offers free digital wills and access to investment accounts to help you plan for your children's future. Join the thousands of parents who trust Fabric to help protect their families. Apply today in just minutes at meetfabric.com/lockedoncollege. That's meetfabric.com/lockedoncollege. Policies issued by Western Southern Life Assurance Company, not available in certain states, and prices are subject to underwriting and health questions. So really interesting stuff about where Ole Miss sits in the S&P rankings. And for people that are just tuning in, Ole Miss is currently sitting at number 9 in the S&P Plus rankings. And how does Ole Miss's schedule line up with the S&P rankings? So we went through and we found where everybody in the rankings sits and why the games and what the most important games are going to be. Like Ole Miss opens at against Georgia State, the number 113 team in the country, the second worst rated team that Ole Miss is going to face on their schedule. It's kind of a nice warm up for Austin Simmons to get ready to go. Then you go on the road at the number 40 ranked team in the Kentucky Wildcats, come home against the number 35 ranked team. The first 4 games kind of all falls in the line for what you're looking for. Kentucky beat Ole Miss in Oxford. Kentucky can play, and traditionally Mark Stoops does well against Lane Kiffin offenses. He has for multiple years. They've played many times, and each time the defense has kind of given Ole Miss a little bit of fits. Arkansas is going to have a little bit of revenge on their mind after Ole Miss scored 7 million points in Fayetteville. Tulane is ranked number 50. They're going to be good. John Summerall's a heck of a coach. But those first 4 games, if they go chalk, Ole Miss should be probably favored by a touchdown or more in every single one of them. On September 22nd, you have a home game against LSU, the number 10 ranked team in the S&P Plus. That's one position behind Ole Miss. Ole Miss should likely be favored in that game by 3.5 to 4 points. The LSU games are hard fought, but Ole Miss generally now has success against LSU in Oxford. I think Ole Miss has won several in a row at this point. I think they're 1-21, 23, and if they win this year, it'd be 3 in a row that they've won in Oxford. LSU's a good team. They're highly ranked. That's a game that I don't know if it'd be considered a toss-up, but it's a situation against a team that you can lose that game. That's going to be an important game for Lane Kiffin to have his P's and Q's on his side. Washington State is the number 84 ranked team, the third worst team that Ole Miss is going to face as far as these rankings go. And that's because John Mateer transferred to Oklahoma. A lot of players left out to go to Wake Forest, where the coach went to. Washington State did get the coach from South Dakota State, Jimmy Rogers, really good coach, but this is going to be a transition year. This is kind of the year to get them. They're going to be pretty good, though. Then you have a game at Georgia, the number 4 ranked team on this schedule. And this is a game that you're probably going to be an underdog in. This is the one game on the schedule that I can point to and say Ole Miss is going to be an underdog in that game. Georgia's going to have revenge on their mind after what happened to them in Oxford. That's going to be a very tough environment for Austin Simmons and the Ole Miss Rebels. Sanford Stadium is no joke. When it's juiced, it's going to be juiced on that game. The next game is against the Oklahoma Sooners. They are the 20th ranked team. It's on the road, which means Oklahoma might actually slide together to be favored. We talked about John Mateer transferring from Washington State. He did go to Oklahoma. Oklahoma, by the way, just hired Jim Nagy from the Senior Bowl to be their general manager, which is kind of a statement of intent by Oklahoma. If you want to look at it, Oklahoma officially clocked in to the SEC with that move because that was just a solid move. Then the next one, you host the number 16th ranked team in South Carolina. We talked about them. They are on the sell list from S&P Plus. They are ranked higher by Mark Schlabach by the human element than actually by analytics. This is a game that Ole Miss would probably win the game, but they're listed in the sell category. The Citadel's not ranked because they are an FCS school. If Ole Miss loses that game, you're going to have more problems than you can think about. And then you have Florida. You're hosting them, number 17 ranked. Good team. DJ Lagway's a heck of a quarterback, and they're always going to have some athletes, but that's a game that Ole Miss should win. And then they go to number 65 ranked Mississippi State, the lowest ranked Southeastern Conference team that Ole Miss plays. Looking at this schedule, the way it sets up, obviously there's a tricky 3-game slate of at Georgia, at Oklahoma, and against South Carolina. That's going to be a big deal. But the way this thing sets up is that Georgia game is probably the one game on the schedule that you're going to be an underdog. Oklahoma is a true toss-up for them being so highly ranked and it being on the road. South Carolina, a little bit overrated potentially, so maybe you get that game. The games against teams that are 10, 16, and 17, the 3 closest games behind you in the S&P Plus, they are at home. So you get the home field advantage in a place where Lane Kiffin doesn't normally lose. I get it. He lost to Kentucky a year ago, but he is usually pretty good, and Ole Miss can be a difficult place to play whenever that place gets going. And that place will be really juiced up against LSU, against South Carolina, and against Florida. Especially South Carolina, because Shane Beamer has this weird thing where he's just kind of trying to poke Lane Kiffin until he reciprocates. But I digress on that one. Those 3 games, the LSU game, the South Carolina, and the Florida game, if Ole Miss can get all 3 of those games, they're going to the playoff. They just are. Barring some sort of a slip up that we're not seeing coming, if Ole Miss beats LSU, South Carolina, and Florida, they're going to the playoff. That's what the season is. At Georgia and at Oklahoma, if you win LSU, South Carolina, and Florida, you can lose to Oklahoma. If you beat Oklahoma, you can probably lose to either one of LSU, South Carolina, and Florida. But if Ole Miss wins their home games, if they go 8-0 at home this year, which is always possible, this is a very difficult place to play recently. If that happens, Ole Miss is going to the playoffs. But according to these S&P rankings, Ole Miss should probably be the probability favorite in every single game except Georgia. And in that Georgia game, you might have something that Georgia is only like a 60% favorite. It's not a typical Georgia type line. And Ole Miss might go to Georgia with even more talent than we're even thinking of. So we'll see exactly how it goes. That schedule, every time I look at it and try and metrically line it up, it looks better and better and better. And I'm pretty fired up about what could happen. Like I said, having number 10, number 16, and number 17 at home as opposed to traveling on the road like you did last year. Last year, those 3 teams, you went to their place on every single one of them. You played Georgia at home, but it was going to be a tough challenge either way. You know, either home or a road. You would like to have them, obviously, but if you're just looking at sheer numbers, you got number 4 at home and you had number 20 at home, and that's what the schedule looked like last year. You went on the road to number 10, number 16, and number 17. That flips this year to where your road game is against Georgia, fine. All good. Road game against Oklahoma, it's going to be a tough test. But if Ole Miss handles business, they should be all right. And you have those 3 home games. And those 3 home games are going to tell the tale this season. In our final segment, Ole Miss hosts Oklahoma in the biggest game, perhaps, of the Chris Beard era. The clash could redefine everything going forward for Ole Miss. Tune in, because by Sunday, we're going to have a much clearer picture of what March holds for this team. March basketball is here, and there's no better way to get in on the action than with Prize Picks. It's the best place for daily fantasy sports. With Prize Picks, you pick more or less on at least 2-player projections, and if you're right, you can win up to 1,000 times your cash. It's fast, it's easy, it keeps every game exciting. I love how I can make my picks in less than 60 seconds and stay engaged the entire game long. When I win, my money hits the account in as little as 15 minutes, no waiting around. Prize Picks even offers weekly promos like Taco Tuesday, where you get extra discounted player projections for even more value. So download the app today and use code LOCKEDONCollege to get $50 off instantly after you play that first $5 lineup. That's code LOCKEDONCollege for $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Prize Picks, run your game. So a big basketball game tomorrow against Oklahoma, and a little bit of house cleaning before we start. There will not be a reaction show after the Oklahoma game tomorrow. The reason being, I have family coming into town, and we are going out to eat, and that'll be about at the same time that Oklahoma and Ole Miss is done playing when the reaction happens, and this is the last chance I'll have to see them before my surgery. So I can't exactly say no to what's going on. Kind of out of my control, so I do apologize for that, but it should be an excellent game. And honestly, if Oklahoma won this game, I would have thoughts. I would have lots of thoughts, because you would be staring directly at a 7-game losing streak going into the NCAA tournament, with Tennessee coming into town and Florida left on the schedule before you go up to Nashville and play. Either way, Ole Miss has a monumental task on Saturday. Oklahoma almost beat Kentucky at home. They are 4-11 in the SEC. I think that's important to know. If Oklahoma wants any chance at all of going to the NCAA tournament, they need to win their last 3 games. So what you have, again, and this is a trend that Ole Miss has been seeing over the last couple of weeks, is you're going to see a desperate team. And a desperate team comes out with a lot of energy, a lot of intensity. And because of that, Ole Miss has gotten off to slow starts against Vanderbilt, against Auburn, and against those teams you weren't able to come all the way back. Now, Ole Miss took the lead on Vanderbilt, but they had used up so much energy over that 15 minutes of trying to chip away at that 19-point lead, they didn't have any gas left in the tank at the end. Against Auburn, Auburn's just the best team in college basketball. I have a hard time getting mad about that game. Now, I would prefer if it wasn't a 30-point loss, but that's one of those that I'm just willing to completely throw it in the trash. These next 2 ball games, especially the game tomorrow against the Oklahoma Sooners, will be absolutely massive in determining what Ole Miss's March fate is going to be. The keys to this game, I think Ole Miss needs to get after Oklahoma and their freshman point guard, Jeremiah Fears. This is a game to turn up the pressure on a team and try and create turnovers and become the defensive juggernaut that Ole Miss was in January and early February. If Ole Miss can become that team and do that and score, they shot a lot of free throws against Auburn, shot 30. That means they hit the line. They did a lot of this stuff, same stuff that they tried to do against Auburn the first time. This time, you just didn't have a 30-point performance by Sean Padula. That was one of probably the major difference of what's happened. But this game, turning up the pressure, if you can force a freshman point guard into some turnovers, you're going to be all right. Number 2 is a scheduled tweet. Be competitive on the boards versus Oklahoma on a Saturday. Don't get completely dominated on the boards. Against Auburn, Auburn had 33. Ole Miss had 20 for that game. Part of that had to do with Auburn just didn't miss any shots. But be competitive on the boards against Oklahoma. Try to not allow them to get into the middle of the lane. The no middle defense for the Ole Miss Rebels, you need to execute that as a very high level. And Ole Miss needs to take care of the ball. They need to get back to that. Against Kentucky, during that stretch, there was 1, 2, 3 turnovers in a game. They were playing extremely clean. In the last couple of games, there's been 5, 6 turnovers in the first 5 minutes of the ball game. Ole Miss needs to play a clean basketball game. So take care of the ball and turn over Oklahoma, and that appears to be the formula for the team on Saturday. The players to watch in this game, a lot of the names that you're used to seeing on this list, but Dre Davis, whenever he plays well, Ole Miss wins. When he does not play well, Ole Miss loses. He is the catalyst for this basketball team. Matt Morrell actually played fairly well against Auburn for as long as he could. That was a good sign of what happened. He looked like he had to take himself out of the ball game, or they took him out against Vanderbilt. He was able to play a little bit against Auburn. That is excellent. He'll have a big role against Oklahoma and Tennessee, especially Tennessee. He's a Memphis kid. Tennessee, probably the last time they play, that's going to mean a little bit to him. And then Malik Dia, who shows flashes of all the time of how dominant he could be. He disappears at times in games. He gets a little bit weird at times in games. He has a tendency to want to drift out and shoot three-point shots. But whenever he wants to play bully ball, truly play bully ball, he can absolutely do it. And we've seen it happen. If Malik Dia can turn that on, Ole Miss is going to have a weapon down low that they can use. And when they have that, the three-point shot, everything gets a little bit easier. In this game, I do think Ole Miss is going to win this game. Might be the homer in me. I'm the biggest homer on the internet, apparently. But I think Ole Miss is going to win this game, and they're going to win it because they are the desperate team. They've run into desperation the last 3 weeks. Auburn needed to beat Ole Miss because they have Alabama, Tennessee, and Kentucky left on their schedule. And they needed 2 of those wins. They needed 2 wins out of those 4 games to clinch the Southeastern Conference Championship. It would be an easy situation. They almost lost to Tennessee. Winning a game in Rupp Arena in Kentucky can be difficult. That is interesting. I think Texas A&M might be on there as well. That's another team that can jump up and get you. Auburn needed that game against Ole Miss to get 2 wins. They play really hard. They have an excellent culture around that program as far as how hard they play. It is kind of enjoyable to watch them actually play the game. It's the outside the line stuff that drives people a little bit crazy. But I do think Ole Miss is going to win this game 72-65. Should be pretty interesting for the Rebels. Listen, again, this Saturday, no reaction show after the Oklahoma game. I'm going to have dinner with my aunt about that time. She's flying in that afternoon, and we're eating dinner before they head off and doing something else they have to do. So it's interesting. This is the biggest basketball game in the tenure of Chris Beard, in my opinion, period. So thank you for making the Locked On Ole Miss podcast your go-to source for Ole Miss sports. We pride ourselves in offering the most comprehensive perspectives, which is why we're the number 1 Ole Miss podcast out there, and your support means the world to us. Thank you for making Locked On SEC your first listen today. For your second listen, check out the Locked On SEC podcast. Host Chris Gordy holds no punches, covering the best conference in college football. Find Locked On SEC on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcast. Hotty toddy, everybody. And remember, analytics is just the old English word that means bad football. We'll see you tomorrow. Or we'll see you Monday.